moving forward, the Antiquities Corporation needs to develop a very proactive plan before somebody writes us up in the newspaper or put us on TV to call us out on why our old cemeteries look like this. Not just because the people dead and their relatives move away mean you must let it look like this.
Somebody's gone to get some water for you.
Thank you. This is Western Cemetery. Now Western Cemetery is a little clean, I must give it to them. But as I mentioned, this is the only one of the cemeteries I'm looking at today that is currently in use. And excuse me for that break. But it seems like somehow within the last 20 or 25 years, the Ministry of Works suddenly realized, you know, some space over there, we could use that. See these white, these are modern graves. Well, this is the pathway here. These are modern graves. Here, modern graves. This one, someone passing through thought they could tie something on it. All of these are historic gravestones. Now, there's no problem, because in this area there are some family plots, some families that still exist, they still have plots in there, they're still in use. But you think the people who come to dig these in the curtains are going to watch it, oh, that's an 1800s grave. Really? This overgrowth here, that's showing the edge of the same area. This overgrown edge here is around, there is an ornate cast iron fencing here. I must give it to them. They at least knew not to chop that down and cause more damage. Because when you want to restrain the plant growth, but you don't want to do it with a cutlass. You want to be a bit more diplomatic than that. So I point out a few. This headstone here, this is at the very southern edge of the cemetery. This area, they still ain't figured out yet. They could put new graves in here. This gravestone here, I had to reduce it so you won't be able to see it, but the name on this is Monday Ranger. Monday is not generally a European name you would give to a child, but it is a West African day name. It's a day name that you would give to a child when they are born on that day. And what we found, what liberated Africans were doing when they came into the Bahamas and they realized that the Anglican priest was getting a little upset when they was calling the children Abuja, stuff like that. They would just translate the day name. The priest may protest if they tried to christen the child Abuja, but they didn't say nothing if they call him Monday. So this is Monday Ranger, born Lagos, Nigeria, 1815. He was a liberated African. He died in 1902. He was buried there. Originally, when I saw this, I'm like, oh, a black man who was buried in the white cemetery. But he was buried there after the 1830s when Governor Coburn had advised Anglican priests not to segregate cemeteries. This marble headstone here, and it's dark because that's microbial growth on the marble. This is the headstone for an American consul who died here in an epidemic in the 1860s. This is, this one, you can see the date here, 1798, but I didn't get the name on there. But this would have been the style of tombs. These would have been expensive tombs, late 1700s, early 1800s. There were tombs similar to these in Bethlehem Cemetery. So in Bethlehem, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference just looking at the gravestones. You have to look at other cultural indicators. In this cemetery, Governor Gregory, the Gregory's Arch is named after, he is buried in there. That was in the area where they was putting in some new graves. My blood pressure was already getting a little high, so I had to come up. But Governor Gregory is buried in this cemetery. Any number of others, and as I showed you in the opening shot, there is a whole section where West India Regiment officers were buried, because the West India Regiment officers, the European ones especially, were constantly dying of yellow fever here. They did not understand that yellow fever was transmitted to humans by mosquito bites. They tore down the original barracks at Fort Nassau and built new ones at Fort Charlotte on top of the hill, but at the southern side of the hill where Chippenham is was a big swamp, a mosquito breeding ground, and they wondered why they still had yellow fever outbreaks in there. But Governor Gregory, I think, also contracted yellow fever, but he died suddenly in the 1850s. He is the only governor that I know of who is buried in the Bahamas. And yeah, before I close and finish up, the gravestone in the corner there next to the Junkanoo case, that is the earliest gravestone. It didn't come from a cemetery. That came from the residence that was used for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a number of years. That came from their grounds when they were refurbishing that building to put the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in there. Mr. Carlton Williams, he was the contractor. He brought that here. There was a water drip right over part of the date. We could only make out that it's like 1728 or something, but it's the grave marker for Thomas Walker. Thomas Walker was the Chief Justice when Woods Rogers was here. He was one of the people in the records. He was one of the people who used to run to Abaco when the Spanish used to come in to burn the town. But
that happened a lot.
That is the earliest gravestone known, but it didn't come from a cemetery. But yeah, for the two Western style cemeteries, Potter's Field or Western Cemetery and Center Burial Ground, that are the early public cemeteries, the big challenge for the Antiquities Corporation is developing a management plan and coordinating it with the Ministry of Public Works, because we don't have the personnel or the money to do it on our own, to sensitively maintain the historic parts while you can still use the newer parts. Because this is the headstone that has collapsed and fallen over. This one needs to be cleaned up. This is slate. This is unusual. This one is sandstone. These need special treatment, because this is also a sandstone stone. All of these are curved in cut stone. So these are not cheap gravestones. They never were cheap when they were put in there. They still aren't cheap now. But if we don't educate the public about the value of these things, what they are, the people may be dead, but the markers they leave behind are to leave an everlasting remembrance of those people, who they were, what they did, regardless of what their original status in life was. Because Monday Ranger would have been rescued from a slave ship by the Royal Navy sometime after 1820, probably after 1825, because if he was born in 1815, the youngest children on ships were usually about 8 or 10 years old. They liked capturing children because you could enslave them for a longer, they had a longer work life. But you have people like Monday Ranger, who started out as an African captive, ends up here. You have a number of wealthy, well-known people, as well as some everyday people. They don't have the fancy markers. This is a baby's grave. It gives you an idea of how far we've come from the days when officers in the West India regiments were constantly dying of yellow fever. Some of these graves, the mother and the baby were buried together, because infant mortality rate for children 5 years and younger, if a child could make their 5th birthday, they were more likely to make their 10th birthday. And as the bioarchaeologists say, you hardly ever find 10 and 11-year-olds in graveyards. If you're finding 10 and 11-year-olds in a graveyard, that's a population under distress because they are not going through a special growth period. Earlier, when up until they're 5, there's no guarantees. And because they're young, between about 5 and 10, they can be taken out by diseases. But by the time they're 10 or 11, their bodies are immune to all of the diseases around if they are being well fed and living in fairly sanitary conditions. In the northern burial ground, the only evidence we had of a juvenile were from the teeth, from some teeth, and those teeth belonged to a child that would have been somewhere between 9 and 11 years old. Because there was some evidence that the population, even though they may have been free, they lived in poor conditions, they couldn't afford healthy food. Even if they could afford food, the sanitary conditions they lived in would contribute to constant infections and shorten their lifespan. But for us to be a society, a people, a community going forward, even in the 21st century, regardless of all our technology, if we do not understand or forget where we've come from, what all we've gone through, history is known to repeat itself, regardless of how much money, how much your circumstances change. If you are not aware of what the past mistakes were, what the past sacrifices were, so that you can recognize those, don't forget those, but move on and don't make those same mistakes, yeah, we may as well leave the trash inside the burial ground. If we want to believe we can move beyond that, we can do much better than that, so much better. Okay, thank you very much.